Mariam was born in a small dusty town where the Harmattan winds blew fine sand into every corner of the houses. She grew up barefoot, running with the other children between mango trees, fetching water from the old well at the edge of the village, and helping her mother grind millet in a wooden mortar that had been used by 3 generations before her. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but always filled with community. Everyone knew everyone, and laughter traveled easily across courtyards. When she was 17, she met Isa. He was tall, with strong shoulders from years of farm work, but what caught her attention most was his eyes. They were kind, and when he laughed, it seemed the whole room joined him. He spoke softly but with confidence, and unlike the boys who bragged or boasted, Isa listened when she spoke. That was how love began, not with gifts, not with promises, but with listening. They married under the shade of a neem tree, surrounded by family and neighbors who sang late into the night. They started their life together in a small mud brick house. It had only 2 rooms, a tin roof, and cracked walls, but to them it was a palace because it was filled with hope. Isa worked as a soldier. He had joined the army when he was young, partly to serve, partly to escape the poverty that pressed on many families. Mariam worried every time he left for duty, but Isa reassured her, "I wear this uniform for you, for the children we will have, and for this land. If no one protects it, who will?" Years passed, and they were blessed with 3 children. Their eldest son, Hamid, loved football and would kick anything round he could find, even oranges. Their daughter, Awa, was quiet but observant, always drawing shapes in the sand with a stick. The youngest, little Karim, was Isa's shadow, always tugging at his trousers, wanting to follow him wherever he went. At night, the family would sit outside under the stars. Mariam cooked simple meals of rice, beans, and leafy soup, and Isa told the children stories of brave hunters who outwitted lions, of ancestors who crossed rivers to build new villages, of warriors who defended their homes against invaders. His voice was deep, and when he spoke, the children listened with wide eyes. Mariam watched him with pride, thinking she had married not only a husband, but also a storyteller, a guide, a man who believed in something greater than himself. But beneath the laughter and warmth, Isa carried burdens he did not always share. In the barracks, he saw things that troubled him. Supplies meant for soldiers often disappeared. Weapons arrived late or not at all. Money allocated for rations vanished, leaving the men hungry. Commanders lived in luxury, while young soldiers patched their boots with old tires. Isa began to take notes. He kept a small notebook hidden in his bag, writing down dates, numbers, and names. He spoke cautiously with a few trusted friends who also saw what was happening. They knew it was dangerous, but they believed someone had to speak. "If we keep quiet," Isa told them one evening, "more of our brothers will die without reason, and when we are gone, our children will inherit only corruption." Mariam noticed his worry. He came home later, sometimes silent, sometimes restless in his sleep. She asked him what was wrong, but he smiled weakly and said, "Nothing, just work." Still, she knew. A wife always knows when her husband carries a secret too heavy for words. One night, after the children had fallen asleep, Isa sat with her under the dim glow of a lantern. He held her hand and whispered, "If something happens to me, remember this. I did not die for nothing. Promise me you will not let them silence the truth." Mariam's chest tightened. She gripped his hand and begged him not to speak like that, but Isa only looked at her with those steady eyes, the same eyes that had first captured her heart. Days later, the news arrived. Isa had not returned from duty. His body was found on the outskirts of the capital, beaten, bruised,
discarded like a sack of rubbish. The army announced it quickly, calling it an accident. But Mariam knew better. The notebook he carried was missing. His friends whispered that he had confronted the wrong people, that he had uncovered names too powerful to challenge. Grief hit Mariam like a storm. She cried until her voice broke. She clutched the photograph of Isa in his uniform, the one taken the day he first became a soldier. She wore black and sat silently in her home as neighbors came to console her. But even in her sorrow, one thought burned inside her. She had promised Isa not to let his death be buried in silence. So she began her journey for answers. She went to commanders, but they brushed her aside. She went to offices, but the doors remained closed. Some told her to forget. Others warned her to stop asking questions. A friend whispered, "Sister, you are a widow now. Do not put yourself in danger. Keep quiet for your children." But Mariam could not. Every time she looked at Isa's photograph, she heard his voice. "Promise me you will not let them silence the truth." Finally, she decided to do the unthinkable. She would go to the palace itself, to the president. People laughed when she said it. A widow at the gates of power? Who will listen to you? But Mariam walked anyway. She wrapped her headscarf tightly, held Isa's photograph close to her chest, and marched to the gates of President Ibrahim Traoré's palace. The soldiers at the gate looked at her with confusion. Widows often came to beg for pensions or support. But there was something different about this woman. Her eyes were not those of a beggar. They were sharp, filled with fire. When they asked her why she had come, she fell to her knees on the hard ground and cried out, "Justice! I want justice for my husband. They killed him because he spoke the truth, and I will not leave until someone listens." Her voice echoed against the palace walls. Passersby stopped. Soon a small crowd gathered. Some watched with pity, others with curiosity. The soldiers shifted uneasily. They were used to dispersing beggars, not grieving women who shouted with such conviction. Inside the palace, word reached President Ibrahim Traoré. He was young, a captain who had risen quickly, admired by many for his courage, hated by some for his boldness. When his aide told him of the widow at the gate, he paused. Many leaders would have ignored her. Many would have ordered the soldiers to remove her quietly. But something in the story stirred him. He ordered, "Bring her to me." Mariam was led inside. She clutched Isa's photograph as if it were a shield. When she entered the hall, she saw the president in his uniform, standing tall, his eyes fixed on her. He did not wave her off or speak down to her. Instead, he walked towards her and asked her gently, "Mother, why are you crying at my gate?" Her voice broke, but she spoke. She told him about Isa, about the missing notebook, about the corruption he had uncovered, about his death. She spoke not only for herself, but for every widow she knew, every soldier's wife who had buried her husband without answers. The hall was silent when she finished. Even the guards who stood by the walls looked shaken. Traoré remained quiet for a moment, then took her hand. He said, "You are right to cry here. If the palace cannot listen to the cries of widows, then it has no reason to exist." He led her outside, where the crowd had grown larger. People craned their necks to see what was happening. And there, at the gates of the palace, President Ibrahim Traoré raised Mariam's hand and declared, "This widow's cry is the cry of our nation. From today, no truth will be buried. We will open every file, follow every trail, and bring justice to those who thought themselves untouchable." The crowd erupted in cheers. Miriam's tears fell, but they were no longer only tears of grief. For the first time since Issa's death, she felt the weight of silence lift. Her husband's voice had reached the highest seat of power. But even as hope spread through the people, shadows gathered elsewhere.
In a tall building in the city, behind curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun, a group of men sat around a polished wooden table. They were dressed in expensive suits, their watches gleamed and their rings sparkled. Yet their faces were pale and restless. On the table lay glasses half filled with whiskey, folders of papers, and telephones that rang and buzzed with nervous messages. One man, with a round belly and a gold chain around his neck, slammed his hand down and said, "This is dangerous, very dangerous. That boy in uniform does not understand how things are done. He is turning the people against us." Another man, with thin lips and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "We have controlled governments for years. We have built companies with nothing but signatures on paper. We have taken our share. Now this captain wants to open every file. If he succeeds, we are finished." The room fell silent. Then a third man, older with gray hair carefully combed back, spoke slowly. "Do not panic. He is still young. He thinks the crowd will protect him. But crowds forget. Power can be bent. We must bend it before it bends us." They whispered plans. Some spoke of bribing. Some spoke of threatening. Others using foreign friends who had benefited from their deals. They did not care about Mariam or Issa or the soldiers who had died. To them, this was only about survival. But while they plotted in the shadows, the light of truth was spreading. The widow's story had caught fire in the streets. In markets, women selling tomatoes told it between customers. "Did you hear? The widow who cried at the palace gates and the captain himself held her hand?" Taxi drivers repeated it to passengers. Children played games in the dust, pretending one was the widow and another was the president. In villages far away, griots composed songs about the brave widow who carried a photograph like a sword of justice. In the palace, Traoré kept his word. He called his closest aides and ordered investigations. Boxes of files were carried in, account books, bank slips, contracts. Some pages were yellow with age, others freshly printed. The president sat at his desk late into the night, flipping through documents. He underlined figures, circled names, and asked sharp questions. One night, after hours of reading, he called in his intelligence chief. "Look here," he said, pointing at a list of payments. "This company has taken millions for supplying food to the army. But ask the soldiers. They say rations have been cut. Where did the food go? Where did the money go?" The intelligence chief wiped sweat from his brow. "Excellency, these names, they are powerful men. Some are even in government." The Traoré's eyes hardened. "Then let the people see how powerful they truly are when the truth is dragged into the light." Meanwhile, Mariam returned home quietly after her day at the palace. She expected life to go back to silence, but instead, her house became a gathering place. Women came to her door with stories of their own. One had lost her husband at the front line without a proper burial. Another's son had vanished after refusing an illegal order. They spoke through tears, and Mariam listened. Though she still grieved, her courage gave them hope. They began to call her Mother of Courage. At night, Mariam still wept quietly into her pillow. She missed Issa's voice, his laughter, his warm presence beside her. But now when she looked at his photograph, she whispered, "Your death is not forgotten. You are still speaking through me." The investigation soon shook the country. Newspapers printed shocking headlines. Radio presenters spoke with anger in their voices. Ordinary people who once felt powerless now listened eagerly to every new detail. A road project had been paid for 3 times but never built. An arms contract had delivered empty boxes instead of rifles. Medicine meant for hospitals was sold abroad. The corrupt men panicked. They gathered again, their voices louder, their glasses of whiskey untouched. "This is madness," one shouted. "Every day new papers, new evidence. The people are turning against us." Another said bitterly, "It is that widow. If she had stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. She gave him a story, and now he rides it like a horse." "Then we must find a way to silence her," hissed the man with sharp eyes. But the idea fell heavy in the room. They all knew it was too late. Mariam was no longer just a widow. She had become a symbol. To touch her now would be to set the whole nation on fire. And so they turned their anger on the president himself. They spread whispers through newspapers, through radios, through foreign correspondence. They said, "He is too young. He is reckless. He is turning against his own ministers. He will ruin the country." But the people were not listening. Their faith was in the widow's cry and the captain's promise. Soon the first arrests were made. Soldiers in plain clothes knocked on doors late at night. Men who had once walked proudly into ministries were now led out in handcuffs. Their neighbors watched in disbelief. This one? But he drove the biggest car in town. That one? He was always at the front in church. Now they were bundled into vehicles and taken away. The trials began and the whole country seemed to hold its breath. Courtrooms overflowed with citizens pressing shoulder to shoulder. Loudspeakers carried the hearings to crowds outside. Inside, judges read evidence in clear voices. Witnesses stepped forward. Some were soldiers, some were clerks, some were ordinary citizens who had seen too much for too long. One afternoon, Mariam herself was called to testify. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her scarf wrapped tightly, Isa's photograph in her hand. The room fell silent as she began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, but grew stronger. She told the court about Isa's honesty, about the nights he returned home troubled, about the notebook he carried, about the warnings she gave her. She told them of the day his body was found and of the silence that followed. As she spoke, the accused shifted uneasily in their seats. Some stared at the floor, others tried to look indifferent, but their eyes betrayed fear. When she finished, there was no sound in the courtroom, only the faint hum of the loudspeakers carrying her words to the crowd outside. Then a murmur rose, growing into chants, "Justice! Justice!" The building itself seemed to shake with the power of the people's voice. Verdicts were delivered in the weeks that followed. Some men were sentenced to prison, others had their wealth seized and their positions stripped. The people celebrated, dancing in the streets. They said, "For once, justice has walked among us. For once, power has bowed." Mariam returned home each evening to her children, who now looked at her with pride. Hamid told her, "Mama, when I grow up, I will also fight for the truth, like Papa." Awa whispered, "Mama, you are strong like the women in the stories." Little Karim clapped his hands and said, "Mama is famous." Their laughter filled the small house again, not with the same innocence as before, but with new strength. Yet challenges still remained. The country was poor. Roads were broken. Farmers struggled. Soldiers at the front still faced enemies. But something deeper had changed. The people had seen that power could listen, that truth could rise, that even a widow's tears could move a nation. One bright morning, Mariam was invited again to the palace. This time, she walked not as a grieving widow, but as a woman respected by the people. She entered the grand hall where ministers sat nervously. They had learned to fear the people's eyes on them. They adjusted their suits and cleared their throats. waiting for the president. When Captain Traore entered, he did something no one expected. Instead of his military cap, he carried a wide straw hat, the kind worn by farmers in the fields. The ministers frowned in confusion. Mariam tilted her head, wondering what he planned. Traore placed the hat on his head and looked around the hall. "From today," he said, "let every leader wear a farmer's hat at least once a week to remind us that we are servants, not masters, to remind us that power is not for our pockets but for the people." At first there was silence. The ministers exchanged uneasy glances. Some tried to hide smirks, others looked shocked. But then Mariam laughed. Her laughter was sudden, clear, and full, the kind of laughter she had not known since before Isa's death. She laughed until tears filled her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. The sound of her laughter spread through the hall. Guards smiled. Some ministers chuckled nervously. The crowd outside, hearing the news, began to laugh and cheer as well. In that moment, the palace was not a place of fear or power, but a place of humanity. And so history remembered not only the widow's tears at the palace gates, but also her laughter in the hall, the laughter that showed a nation could heal, that truth could win, and that even in the darkest times, hope could still wear a straw hat and smile.